This is a comment that I often receive in my videos. So is it true? You'll be shocked to hear this, but it's a myth. And it's a myth that conflates two realities that are not related to each other. That of gun confiscation for nefarious purposes and that of gun control, generally speaking. A gun confiscation can be a means used by dictators to disarm people, and it has been so in history at times, but the reality is that there isn't a one-to-one relationship. Not all confiscation is used to prop dictatorships, and not all dictatorships have used gun confiscation. The most common example that is given is Germany in the 1930s. What many people don't realize is that while it's true that in Germany there was a gun confiscation, the reality is that a total ban on guns was the result of the Versailles Treaty in 1919. And that ban was relaxed in 1928, so several years before the rise to power of you-know-who, gun laws in Germany were actually more permissive than they'd been in the decade before. We all know what happened in Germany in the 1930s and 40s, but does that mean that any action by the government to restrict access to guns leads to or aims at dictatorship? Another shocker. The answer is no. Just look at the example in Australia where literal gun confiscation led to a crash in the number of homicides and suicides. And there's a difference between gun confiscation and gun control. Gun control limits who can access, own, and use firearms, but it isn't confiscation, and it certainly isn't confiscation for the purpose to establish a dictatorship. It is legislation put in place to reduce the misuse of firearms, criminal or negligent that it may be. To say that gun control legislation is confiscation and therefore leads to dictatorship is like saying that because most socialist countries have free healthcare, that free healthcare is socialism and therefore leads to gulags. Most European countries, and in fact most democratic countries in the world, would beg to differ. And to say that the fact that no dictatorship has ever been established in the United States is proof of the fact that the Second Amendment works is like saying that the fact that Great Britain has never experienced a coup d'etat means that monarchy must be the safest form of government. If it were true that heavily armed societies are free societies, then places like Iraq, Somalia, and Yemen, all countries considered authoritarian regimes by the EIU Democracy Index, and all countries with higher than average gun ownership rates would be considered the most free countries in the world. And conversely, countries like Japan and Belgium and Denmark, all countries with a democracy index higher than the United States, should be in the hands of totalitarian regimes. The reality is that while the NRA continues to say so because it promotes its narrative, there just isn't any relationship between gun confiscation and dictatorship. The only relationship that exists is between gun ownership and the fact that these kids will never have a chance to become adults because the NRA has convinced so many Americans that it's okay to sacrifice them to secure a phantomatic right that our founding fathers never meant to exist.